What were some immediate red flags on the first date that made you not go on a second date? Someone I met through social media with whom I had a ton of mutual friends but had never met in person asked me out. We decided to meet at Barnes& Noble so we could get coffee and pick out books. We were both avid readers. He was incredibly attractive and smart, and he seemed genuinely into me. I was thrilled. We get there, and within the first 3 minutes, he asks to kiss me. I agreed, and it was, wow, instant fireworks, all the tingly feelings. Things were going great, but then he started getting increasingly handsy. These things can be great once you're comfortable with someone, but not at the start of a first date. He only wanted to make out and didn't respect my attempts to brush him off. So, 10 to 20 minutes in, I was starting to feel a little icky and kept saying things like, "Let's just keep getting to know each other." He said something like, "I want to get to know you in the bathroom," which, honestly, that can be taken in so many ways, and none of them are good. A pickup line involving the word bathroom makes me want to vomit. Eventually, I said I had to get going to work. He tried to convince me to quit my job and stay with him for the day, even suggesting we could go back to his place. When he said something along the lines of, "Once we get married, you won't need to work anymore anyway," I was done. Nope. No thank you. I told him it wasn't going to work. He got furious, accusing me of wasting his time, and bolted. By the time I got to my car, he had already deleted me from all social media. I'm still not really sure if he was angry because I didn't want to hook up in the Barnes & Noble bathroom, didn't want to marry him, or because I had a job. Maybe all three. Probably just because he was a moron. Story 2. I was planning a first date with this guy years ago, and he suggested bowling. I said it was fine, but I had only bowled once a few years earlier, and I was legitimately terrible. The group I was with at the time made it fun anyway, despite my total lack of coordination. He offered to teach me, but I said another time. I just wanted a relaxed night to get to know him. He suggested we still bowl, no lessons, and that he could share in the hilarity of my lack of skill. I was down. The night came, and the lessons started almost immediately. How to stand, where to stand, everything I was doing wrong, plus constant reminders that I wasn't taking it seriously. He insisted he was teaching me for my own good, but he became mean. Not one smile except at the very start when he saw me. I told him this wasn't the fun, chill night I had in mind, and he said it would be if I took the game more seriously. He was genuinely angry the entire night. Story 3. He got arrested for shoplifting right in front of me. He didn't actually shoplift in front of me, just got arrested. I was probably about 19 or 20 and incredibly naive at the time. I'm 30 now. I had known him for a few weeks, and we decided to go out on a dinner date. We were on our way to dinner. I was driving, and he wanted to stop to make a return at GameStop. I thought, sure, no problem. Well, it turns out he actually went in to quickly shoplift about $500 worth of stuff. Mind you, I thought he was making a return, so I stayed in the car the whole time he was stealing. I'm assuming the employee watched him walk back to my car because, within a minute, a cop pulled up next to us and tapped on my passenger window. The officer asked him for his driver's license and went to run it. I asked, what the heck did you do? And this jerk goes, "Oh, I have unpaid parking tickets." LOL. While the first cop was running his information, an unmarked car pulled up on my side, and a second cop, or maybe a detective, pulled me out of the car and started interrogating me. He must have assumed I was in on it, like this guy's getaway driver or something. I turned around to see him getting pulled out of the car and cuffed. The cops were super nice to me because I was honest and cooperative, and they could tell I had absolutely no clue what was going on. So they let me go home. I had no idea what he really got arrested for until I checked our local jail intake website. Turns out he had shoplifted $500 worth of stuff from GameStop and had 3 outstanding warrants for assault charges. Dodged a serious bullet there. Story 4. We met up at his place. He was making dinner for me. We were chatting on the couch when he stood up to excuse himself to the restroom. As he walked away, he turned and mentioned the cameras all over his home, saying, "Don't steal anything," and then pointed to a stack of papers on an end table. I believe in honesty. That's my arrest record. Everything is right there. Then he went on his way. I considered leaving right then, but I didn't. I did pick up that stack of papers. Holy crap. His arrest record was several pages long and spanned 3 states. Most of the arrests were for domestic violence, There were a couple involving weapons, some minor drug charges, and assault charges. He came back into the room, and thank God my phone rang. I answered it even though I didn't recognize the number and had no idea who it was. I pretended it was one of my daughters and that she needed to be picked up immediately. I will never know who was actually on the other end of that call, but I walked out of that guy's home and never looked back. I'll admit I casually ignored some red flags before our date, but the camera story. And I do not believe for a minute he actually had cameras everywhere. Plus, the stack of criminal history papers made it impossible to ignore what I already felt. Story 5. I met up with this guy from Tinder. After talking for a bit and having coffee, asked, "Want to meet my kid?" I felt totally put on the spot, and although I was clearly uncomfortable, I panicked and said yes. We went back to his place, and I met his child. She was actually pretty cool. Then he sent her off to bed and proceeded to tell me that the mother of his child had randomly dropped dead in their kitchen one day, and now his kid didn't have a mom. I looked around his place and saw pictures of the supposedly deceased mother everywhere. I told him it was getting late and that I was going to head out. Before I left, he asked if he could get a little close to me. It was a very specific and super odd request. I said no. The next day, he texted me asking if I would babysit his kid, not even asking me on a second date, just asking for childcare. Story 6. It made me cancel the first date we had planned. I met a guy on a dating site and he asked me out. I agreed. Later, I got a call from work saying a package had been delivered. It was a huge bouquet of flowers. I was so confused. I asked him if he had sent them, and he said, "I did. You said you had a bad day last Friday, so I wanted to make this Friday a good one for you." Normally, I would have absolutely loved this gesture and been over the moon. The only problem was that I never told him where I worked, and I had told him I lived in a large city an hour away to be on the safe side. So not only had he found my real town, but he also found out where I worked. Instant red flag. Made me terrified. Edit. I am not on LinkedIn and never have been. Story 7. On our first date, he told me he was in med school at the university in our town. I knew immediately there was no med school, but I thought maybe he was just taking pre-med classes or something, so I went on a second date. He spent an hour telling me about how, after his military service, he had worked as a military contractor doing spy work in Iraq, and that if I only knew the things he'd done. We stopped by his apartment to pick something up, and while there, I noticed all his mail was in a different name than the one he had given me. I magically got a text from work, told him I had an emergency, and had to go immediately. After I told him there wouldn't be a third date, he got frighteningly angry. I caught him lurking in the bushes outside my apartment late at night several times. I eventually had to get a restraining order in the name he had given me. After that, I never saw him again. Thank God. Story 8. Not exactly red flags, but just some small world coincidences that made that first date the last one. For context, before the date, I picked him up. He was in a wheelchair. He had lost his leg in a motorcycle accident a few years earlier and had recently had surgery on his leg because of bone spurs. He normally wears a prosthetic. We went out for breakfast. Everything seemed fine, no major issues. When it came time to pay, his card was declined. He called his dad, who also happened to be his boss, to figure out why his paycheck hadn't been deposited. The conversation went back and forth, and I ended up paying. He promised to pay me back. It wasn't a big deal. It happens, and I get it. So we get back to my car, and he made a comment about the last time he was around a RAV4. It was his motorcycle accident. He had hit one that was pulling out of a restaurant, and that's when he lost his leg. For some reason, that triggered a memory of a conversation I had had with my mom about my aunt, who had the same car and had totaled it in an accident. I started texting him and asked a few more questions about the accident, where it happened, and so on. Long story short, it was my aunt who was driving the car he hit. He was in the process of suing her, despite the fact that he had been going almost double the speed limit at the time and didn't even have his license. Needless to say, there was no second date. He also never paid me back for breakfast. Story 9. Another great one. I went on a date with a Korean-American guy in college. It was really lovely until his mother called during our coffee date. She asked him what my name was, and he told her, first and last. He suddenly got a sad look on his face, stood up, and apologized profusely for wasting my time. He said, "I am so sorry. I should have had her look you up before the date." I was completely confused and asked, "What are you talking about?" Apparently, he didn't realize my name was Japanese American. I'm biracial but white passing. His mother had seen my Facebook profile picture at the time, which showed me and my family at the Obon Festival hosted by the Buddhist Temple and Japanese American Society in my city. He left the date because his mother told him he couldn't date a Japanese girl. Story 10. Part 1. I was 24 years old. He came to the door to pick me up and he was carrying something. It wasn't flowers. It was a Bratz doll. An actual Bratz doll, still in the box, brand new, as if he had gone to the store and made a conscious decision to buy it for 24-year-old me. He was 32. "I thought you'd like this," he said, dead serious. Did he want me to act younger? I don't know, but it completely creeped me out. The whole date was weird. Part 2. The next day, he kept calling while I was at the grocery store, and I don't like to talk on the phone while shopping. I called him back. Dumb, I know. He asked why I had been ignoring his calls, and I told him the truth. I'd been shopping and preferred to interact with the people I needed to speak to, deli person, etc., without being on the phone. He got upset and was mad or sad that it wasn't fair the grocery store workers got that much of my time and attention. But he didn't. That was the end of that. Story 11. One guy I reluctantly met up with once turned out to be a Nazi magician. He opened the conversation by praising Hitler and denying the Holocaust, and went on to say that immigrants shouldn't be allowed in the country anymore. This was bad enough, considering I am an immigrant, and so was he. He then proceeded to bend a spoon with his mind and pressured me into solving an impossible riddle. All of this happened in maybe an hour, which I had stayed for purely out of morbid curiosity. Then he told me I wasn't what he was looking for because I was too cold to be the future mother of his children. Yes, Nazi sympathizer? You are correct. I felt very cold toward you. And then he asked if I wanted to come home with him. I'm still in disbelief. Story 12. Old, worn-out t-shirt, sweaty, brought his dog along. The dog wouldn't look at me when I tried to make friends, only at his master. He was a cell phone tower technician and decided he could psychoanalyze me. He told me I'm afraid of men despite the fact that I had met him in a state park. He complained that he's tired of having steak dinners and ice cream and still not getting a relationship out of it, so from now on he's going for take them to bed first. He told me I had a lot to think about. Nope, didn't have to think at all. His profile said he didn't like organized religion. On our date, he told me he belonged to some religious faith following a guru, Osho, in India. He'd even been to India a couple of times. Then he mentioned that his wife had passed away 6 weeks ago. He asked if he could call me. I said yes, thinking, sure, you can call. I'm not going to answer. He never called. Story 13. I met this guy in a public park through a dating app. He was an unemployed military vet and clearly had some mental issues, none of which were very apparent when texting. As soon as we sat down to chat, he told me about his current living situation and asked if he could move in with me and my kids. He even offered to watch them while I worked and then got mad when I immediately declined, since I didn't really know him and we had just met. I was so annoyed that he even thought that was okay to ask. I'm a very protective mom. The whole time, he was pushy and upset when I wasn't just going along with whatever plans he had already imagined for us. Near the end of the meeting, he asked if I even intended to date him, and I told him outright, no. He got mad and just left. Not long after, I got a message from him saying he had wasted his gas coming to meet me and that I could have at least slept with him. Apparently, he thought I owed him something because I wouldn't provide him with shelter and financial support. Story 14. On a first date, the woman I was seeing explicitly said, I expect anyone I date to buy me things. Not just flowers. She meant literally going to the mall and buying all sorts of stuff. And get this, she was a psychologist. I shudder to think someone could misuse her professional capacity like that. I had a second woman I dated for a couple of months, so not a first date, who was similar. 4 months in, she told me she wouldn't be with anyone who made less than $100,000 a year. This was around 2009, so adjusted for inflation, that would be closer to $150,000. I could not believe my ears. I was a scientist at the time, and I said, if we were married and I lost my biotech job and took an academic position as a professor making $75,000, you would leave me? Yes, was her response. I dumped her that day. Story 15. One date in particular comes to mind. This guy I knew through a mutual friend kept asking if he could take me to dinner. I always politely turned him down because I had just come out of a relationship and wasn't looking to jump into another, but my friend convinced me that I should try and get back out there and enjoy myself. The next time I ran into him, he asked again, so I relented and agreed. The date went fine for the most part. Just a few awkward moments here and there, but nothing that made me want to call it a night. Then we got to the bill. He paid with his card and said, "Don't worry, I've got you covered. You can pay me back for your half when we get back to my place," and made a winking gesture at me. Needless to say, there was no second date, and he made the journey back to his place alone. Story 16. I went on a Tinder date a few years ago. He made multiple comments along the lines of, you really shouldn't just meet guys off Tinder. What if I was planning to kill you? And tried to play it off as a joke. After the fourth time he joked about it, I started to feel really uneasy. He was also just generally unpleasant to be around. I texted my friend to call me with a made-up emergency so I would have an excuse to leave. He dropped me off at her house, and I thought I was all good. Nope. He then got out of the car and walked right into the house. At this point, my friend told him he needed to leave. He said, "All right, fine, I'll leave," but just continued standing there staring at us. We were like, "Okay, so?" Then leave. And he goes, "Aren't you going to walk me to my car?" Obviously, this dude was acting super bizarre, and I was scared that if I didn't just go along with what he said, he might lash out. So I said, "All right, fine, let's walk to your car." We go outside, get to the car, and then he just stands there staring at me again. I said bye and started walking quickly toward the house when, all of a sudden, he very angrily demanded that I hug him. At that point, I literally just turned around and ran into the house. He sat in the car outside for like 10 minutes, texting me super angry messages about how he wouldn't leave until I gave him a hug and a kiss. After getting no response from me whatsoever, he finally left. So yeah, I guess you could say that was a bit of a red flag. Story 17. Should have seen this one coming. Once, a girl got very visibly upset when the restaurant mentioned they only had a wine bar and not a full cocktail bar. Afterwards, she invited me to her place, and when I got there, it was a mess. She asked if I wanted a drink to relax, and I said, "Sure." A few minutes later, she came back and said she was sorry, but she had drank the last of her whiskey that morning. Then she told me she had recently realized she had a drinking problem. The date then turned into about an hour-long therapy session until I asked to go home. She texted afterwards, but I just told her I didn't think I was ready to date right now. Another time, a girl opened the chat on a dating app with, "Who are your favorite authors?" My answer seemed to satisfy her, so we went out for coffee. I mentioned it was a very unique icebreaker, and she replied, "I always ask that. I want to make sure there is at least one woman and one minority." Then she started going on a rant about how everyone says they're liberal, but they don't support liberal authors or date minorities. As a minority, all I could think was that I was a token date to solidify her liberal credibility. I eventually stopped seeing her and started seeing someone else. She later texted me to see if my then girlfriend and I wanted to join her woke book club. Story 18. He ordered a ton of food without asking what I wanted. I didn't want nearly that much, and with my allergies, I couldn't eat half of it. Then, when the check came, he casually said, "Well, I don't want to be a Jew about it," and asked if we could split it. I had to pause for a moment before I managed to tell him that, in fact, I am Jewish. Side note, I'm still confused. If his point was avoiding the stereotype that Jews are greedy, shouldn't he have offered to pay the whole thing? Maybe I'm just bitter about covering half of that nonsense. Dating in North Carolina. Never a dull moment. Story 19. This all happened during our first and last date. It literally kept getting worse, one after the other. When the food arrived, he immediately asked the restaurant to remake it because it wasn't cooked exactly how he wanted. Then, he returned the remade dish and just ordered something else. Red flag. His phone suddenly lit up, and I saw a picture of two young girls. I asked if they were his nieces, and he said they were his 2-year-old and 4-year-old daughters, which he had never mentioned to me, even after I had asked if he had any kids. Red flag. Then he told me he still lives with his baby Mama X and has no near-term plan of them living apart. Oh, and they still live in his parents' basement. Extreme red flag. He then randomly started talking about how much he hates the left wing because it doesn't favor white men like himself. Then he proceeded to say that immigrants ruined this country. Mind you, I'm Middle Eastern and my parents are immigrants. Definitely a red flag. We talked about traveling, and very nonchalantly he says, "You probably have to leave so much earlier for the airport because of security, eh?" I asked what he meant, and no word of a lie, he goes, 9/11. Gotta be extra safe, Backhanded, low-key, racist red flag. At that point, the red flags had turned into checkered flags, telling me to end it and leave. Without any further response, I grabbed my coat, thanked him for the free meal, and walked out. Story 20. I remember going out on 2 dates with a girl when I was in my late 30s. She didn't ask me anything during either date. She's very expressive and loves to talk. Even in texts, she would send hilarious memes and emojis that matched our conversation, but in person, she wouldn't ask me a single thing about myself. Not even, "How are you?" or "How was your day?" or "How was work?" She just loved talking about herself. Sure enough, when I said I didn't want to pursue her and that we should just stay friends, she blew up at me. She called me all sorts of names. "You're a frigging loser. You're a loser." And started cursing at me, saying, "You a-hole, I deserve better than you." I remember just looking at her, stunned. The girl clearly had some serious internal issues. I told her that she deserved someone better than me because I, for sure, would not have been able to handle what was happening. I explained that she was overreacting, she wasn't losing anything, and that she would have the opportunity to meet someone else. Then she started blaming me for things I had never done. LOL. She said things like, "You're selfish. You only think about yourself. You never think about me. It's always about what you want to do." I told her, "You're talking to me like we've been dating for 2 years. We only knew each other for 2 weeks. I kindly told her we were done. She then started apologizing and tried to convince me to stay, saying we should just start over. I told her, "No, thank you. Really, please don't do this to your next date. Just take it easy, because you might push away a good man." Then she started to sob, and I walked away. Oh boy, I felt sorry for her, considering she seemed to have unresolved emotional hurt from previous relationships. We didn't even do it, and I'm glad we didn't. Story 21. A friend of a friend asked me on a date at a random BBQ, and he seemed chill, so I was like, oh yeah, why not? A day before, he said, "It's a fancy place, so dress up." Not my usual. I normally prefer something casual for a first date. It takes the pressure off and lets you get to know someone with less nerves. At that point in my life, I don't think I'd ever worn anything other than a pair of jeans. But he seemed really keen on the idea, so I thought, hey, this could be fun. Roll with it. I borrowed a gorgeous dress and got ready. Nice hair, everything. He came to pick me up from my friend's house, the friend I borrowed the dress from. But when he arrived, he was in jeans and a t-shirt. I thought, okay. Thought it was fancy, but maybe he has an issue with collars. I don't know. Anyway, we drive for about 15 minutes and end up at the mall. He's talking the whole way there, but I chalk it up to nerves. I think, oh, maybe the place is next to it and we're just using the parking? Nope. We go inside and end up at a pizza place in the food court. It had an Italian name, so I guess. I'm sitting there in a little black dress, full makeup, surrounded by people in shorts and tank tops, and I'm sticking out like a sore thumb. I was so uncomfortable, and people kept staring and laughing. Totally ridiculous. But I can't blame them. I give him the benefit of the doubt and try to get to know him. Maybe his dazzling personality and charm are worth this confusion about what fancy means. I try to go Dutch at the counter, but he refuses. He insists it's his treat and gets all weird about it, so I just politely thank him and head back to the table to keep it there, because, again, it's a food court. When he comes to the table with the food, he's canceled my pizza order and gives me a side salad instead, throwing out some inane comment about health while tucking into a double pepperoni stuffed crust. Right then, I start getting a clearer idea of the guy. He goes on a monologue for the entire date, the whole date. He barely takes a breath. Years later, I still remember the make and manufacturer of his favorite bow for archery, every pet he's ever owned, and his family medical history. After a while, I started wondering if he even remembered my name, the ship, on whether he would be vaguely interested in any detail about, my personality, had long since sailed. So, I tried to make my leave as politely as possible after about 30 minutes of torture. I put up with more nonsense when I was younger. I thank him for the date and say I'm going to head off now, all while slowly scooting out of the table bench thing. He looks panicked and yells, "Wait, you haven't seen my tattoo!" and whips off his shirt to reveal 2 blue shapes on his ribcage. I'm frozen in horror and fascination at this now eye-level monstrosity, and without even thinking, I blurt out, "Why did you get a Kleenex tattoo?" Man loses his mind. Turns out they were supposed to be manta rays. Lord knows what the artist was on when doing those. He's screaming about disrespect, then accuses me of being too stuck up and fancy to appreciate his art. At that point, I just noped out of there. The next day, he sent a small dog plushie toy via a mutual friend, apologizing and asking for another date. I did not accept. Story. 22, I went on a blind date set up by a friend with a woman who possibly had some mental issues. When I arrived at her home to pick her up, we sat around in the living room before leaving for dinner. Unfortunately, all she did was talk about her boyfriend, who had died in a car accident about 2 years prior. He was driving too fast and was drunk. She kept a blood-soaked book from the day of the accident and showed it to me. I wish I remember the title. It was definitely conceptual, but definitely blood-soaked. Huge red flag. I decided to go ahead with the date. We went to a restaurant bar, sat, talked, and enjoyed our meal. About midway through, we decided to pause and enjoy a dance together. After we returned to our table, some stranger came up and asked her to dance, and she said yes. That surprised me, but I decided to stay chill about it. An hour later, I just got up and walked out. I figured she was having more fun with him so he could give her a ride home. I think it took her a long time to notice I was gone. Looking back, I could have handled that better. And honestly, I don't like how many times I've had to say this in my life. I could have done better. Story 23. Not a first date per se, but a guy I had just started seeing back in 2020. He was perfectly sweet and normal, right up until the exact minute he asked me to be his girlfriend. I kid you not, the man went from angel to demon in a single breath. One moment that really sticks with me. He apparently stalked my Facebook constantly because one day he found a comment on an old photo of mine. A photo from 5 years earlier from a high school friend who wrote, "Love you. You look gorgeous. 5 years old. And I haven't even spoken to that friend in years." This man absolutely lost his mind. He started screaming at me on the phone, saying no one talks to his girlfriend like that. Then he escalated. Fast. He told me he had friends in high places who could kill my friend and no one would ever know. He kept going on about how no man was ever allowed to say things like that to his girlfriend. Another instance, before the Facebook incident, he heard a text notification on my phone and immediately accused me of being on Tinder. I'm like, WTF? It wasn't Tinder. I showed him my phone, no Tinder app anywhere. But he continued to berate and scold me, insisting he knew the sound Tinder makes and that it could only come from that app. No matter how many times I proved I didn't have Tinder, he insisted I was cheating on him. He accused me of sleeping with all my friends. He got jealous over my close relationship with my father. At one point, he told me no men were allowed to like or heart react to my Facebook statuses, and I was not allowed to like or heart react to theirs. We lasted a very short time. All of this happened in the span of a few days because he was completely insane. People, please, please watch out for men like this. Story 24. He said, "I love you." On the first date, we'd only known each other for 2 days at that point. He also kept asking to see my bedroom, which was just bad vibes on a first date. I ended it there because he was moving way too fast and I was completely overwhelmed. But he didn't stop. He started stalking me. He would message my best friends, whom he had never met but somehow knew were really close to me, asking for my number and claiming he missed me. We literally had known each other for 2 days and gone on one bad date. How could he possibly miss me? He didn't even know me. A year later, I was at an anime convention with my new boyfriend. We were both cosplaying characters from Dramatical Murder. And guess who showed up to photobomb us also in Dramatical Murder cosplay? Mr. Red Flag himself. My boyfriend knew who he was, and when the photo was happening, he thought, I should kiss him or something to show we're together. But he was wearing a mask as part of his cosplay, so in a panic, he just grabbed my crotch. Ironically, in any other scenario, that would have been a red flag. Yeah, definitely dodged a bullet with that guy. I do sometimes wonder what on earth the photographer thought was happening. Story 25. Before even going on a first date, a guy I knew in high school messaged me while I was getting ready for a shower. I was only wearing a towel, letting the water warm up because the water heater was old and took a while. The message was just, "Hey, how have you been? It's been a while." I opened it to see who it was since it had been a decade, and I didn't recognize the name at first. I planned to message him back after my shower once I was dressed and comfortable so I could have a decent conversation. Literally, 13 minutes after he sent that message, I hopped out of the shower. I saw another message from him, but this time it was abusive, calling me an uptight snob who needed to grow up and get over myself. He said he wasn't the same guy from high school, and it was incredibly messed up of me not to just get over it. I replied, "You sent me this 7 minutes after the first message. I was in the shower and was going to message you when I got out and settled. Obviously, you are the same person as you were a decade ago, since I was gone less than 15 minutes. Then I blocked him. Didn't bother waiting for a reply. Story 26. I had worked overnight at an economy hotel as an auditor for most of my 20s. A nice Japanese-Canadian guy around my age was staying with us for over a month with a group of fellow pilots who did surveying and map making. He politely asked me out and I declined because I knew better than to crap where I sleep. He still stopped by the front desk to make conversation, but he seemed really down because I was obviously trying to avoid him. As his leave was winding down, I began to feel guilty for how quickly I said no and figured it wouldn't hurt to go on one date since he was going back to Canada soon. The date itself was a complete breath of fresh air. He was a gentleman, and it was the most normal, healthy interaction I'd had with someone, romantically interested in me. After the date, I dropped him off and everything continued normally until he asked me about life. I briefly explained I was going through a rough patch after a bad breakup. He said, "It all makes perfect sense why you're struggling, and it's not your fault." I jokingly asked him, "Whose fault is it then?" Without hesitation, he said, "The Jews, of course." Then he proceeded to send me statistics about how Jews were responsible for ruining the world. It was horrific to see someone who had seemed so normal reveal such warped beliefs. Needless to say, I blocked him and followed my gut to never fraternize with guests again. That was my one and done. Story 27. A guy I'd been friends with for a couple of years asked me out. We knew each other, so I thought it could be a fairly normal night out. Nope. We met at a bar restaurant and sat at the bar. He ordered all meat appetizers despite me being a vegetarian and said, "You can eat this or go hungry." I ordered my own food. Die Hard was just starting to play on the TV, and he asked me if I liked it. I admitted I'd never seen it, and he proceeded to describe the entire movie in real time. I am not exaggerating. I was not allowed to speak while he explained every single detail of the movie while it played silently on the bar TV. I'd had too much to drink to leave and drive home, so I just sat there and endured his 2-hour monologue while I slowly sobered up. When the movie finally, mercifully ended, he asked the bartender for his check and said, "I'm not paying for her, though." The bartender brought his check and told me I didn't owe anything. After my date left, the bartender told me it was one of the most painful things he'd ever witnessed. Apparently, he and some of the servers had been placing bets on how long this guy would actually talk about Die Hard. I'm just glad I had a witness because it was so ridiculous. There was no second date, and he literally never spoke to me again. Story 28. I went on a Tinder date where I ended up speaking maybe the first 5 minutes. After that, without any trigger or verbal engagement from me, he spent an entire hour ranting and moaning about how much he hated women. He did the classic, "women just want to date a-holes, but ignore nice guys like me" bit, using terms like dumb bitches, referring to them as female. He went on about how women only go on dates for free food, blah blah blah. I was dead silent the whole time, probably with an awkward smile plastered on my face. I ate my meal in silence, refused to let him pay, and endured the full tirade. When he walked me to my car, he raved about how I was the coolest chick he'd ever gone on a date with, and even tried inviting me back to his house. I noticed the parking lot was busy, which gave me the courage to call him out on his ridiculous behavior. I asked him if it was possible that the only reason he thought I was cool was because I hadn't said a single word the entire date. I told him his behavior made me physically ill and that he was talking so loudly in public I felt humiliated. I told him it was one of the worst dates I had ever been on and that he legitimately didn't deserve a girlfriend because he clearly hated women. I called him a whiny bitch and pointed out how every story he told made it stunning to me that he saw himself as the victim, because in every single one, he was clearly the guilty party and the a-hole. I went off maybe a little too hard because he actually started crying. Story 29. He arrived an hour late. I had to wait in the rain. 5 minutes into our conversation, he was already trashing his father for his own tardiness and making inappropriate comments. We went to dinner, where he said some really racist stuff and then went for a walk. He got very pushy until he managed to kiss me. I initially turned my head when he tried, but ended up giving in because I just wanted to go home. Then he tried to take things a little further, and when I said no, he responded, "Wow, you know how to set limits." He also talked about the size of his, and told me not to get a piercing or tattoo I liked because he didn't find them feminine. The next day, I didn't say anything because it was his birthday, but right after, I told him I did not want to meet up again. He seemed surprised and said something like, "Oh, it's a shame. I saw you as relationship material." Story 30. Oh man, this was pure insanity. I'll try to make it brief. I matched with a cute woman on Tinder. We chatted and things got heated fairly quickly. She invited me over that night, giving off serious one-night stand vibes. I was into it, so I went over. Red flag number 1, she was 30 to 40 pounds heavier than her pictures. I'm not usually bothered by weight, but the dishonesty was a little off-putting. I decided to push forward anyway, hopeful for, well, what I came for. She poured us glasses of wine and we sat down. Within 10 to 15 minutes, she won. Accused me of having an eating disorder because I mentioned I was training for an upcoming race. 2, showed me a photo album of her entire family, saying things like, "I can't wait for you to meet them." 3, drank 3 glasses of wine herself. When she got up to use the restroom, I discreetly called an Uber. When she came back, I told her I had to go. Her response? "Most men would at least spend the night." I said, "Not me," and left. Story 31. Years ago, a friend tried to set me up with a guy he worked with. We chatted online for a bit and then arranged to go out because he seemed nice. We met up at a pub. It's one of those bars full of creeps stuck in the 70s. You know the type. When I met him outside, he was not what I expected. First, he greeted me by saying, "Hello, handsome girl," which made me cringe a little. Second, he had told me he was 6'2" when we were talking, but in reality, he was more like 5'5". Height isn't a huge deal for me, but I absolutely hate being lied to. Whatever, he seemed nice enough, so we went inside. He went straight to the bar, ordered himself a pint and a 3-course meal. I thought we were just going for a drink or two, but okay. We sat down and chatted for a bit. He seemed friendly, and we even had a few laughs. Then his food arrived. He ordered a steak for his main and ate the entire thing with his hands. Not cut with a knife, just picked it up like a sandwich. When he hit a bit of gristle, he spat it back onto the table. Maybe not a big deal to some people, but table manners are important to me. I told him I'd been called into work early and he walked me there. It was a 10-minute walk from the bar. I ended up sitting in the staff room for 3 hours before starting my shift. I just find poor dining etiquette a turnoff. Needless to say, we didn't speak again. Story 32. So many. One guy called me a townie for being from the city he had moved to, then proceeded to tell me he was the smartest kid in his school growing up and a high achiever. He was a middle school teacher at the time, but complained endlessly about hating the kids. To top it off, he showed up in sweatpants and slides, like he'd just come from the gym. This was for drinks at a bar. Another guy asked me what items I hoarded, not collected, hoarded. He bragged about having a jersey and helmet from every NFL, NHL, MLB, and NBA team. When I asked where he kept all this, he said his parents had a 5-bedroom house. One of the last dates I went on before taking a long break was with a guy who used a 15-year-old photo in his profile. He showed up and was probably at least 20 years older than me, missing teeth, and didn't know how to use a debit card. We had coffee, and he proceeded to tell me that he had the equivalent of a PhD because he was so well-read and had so many friends who went to grad school. He also bragged about a falling out with his brother because he was so much smarter than most people, and mentioned he was in the process of having a falling out with his mom too. I tried to end the date early by saying I needed to take my sister some medicine, and when he asked where I parked, he launched into a story about how he had totaled his car, but apparently, cars are meaningless anyway. Bonus. One guy spent an entire conversation telling me about his ex and how she had severe mental health issues, but he still wanted to try to get back together with her because he always wanted to have kids with her. I knew I didn't want to date him, but he was part of a new social circle I was just entering, so trying to be polite, I texted to ask how he was. His follow-up, that he was cultivating a certain personal brand and didn't think I fit it. I laughed. Story 33. I gave a chance to a not-so-attractive man I met on a dating app. The week before our date, he spent the entire time hyping up some amazing idea he had, but wouldn't tell me what it was. So we finally go out, and I'm unsure what we're doing. First, we grab Thai food, which was fine. Then he takes me to glow-in-the-dark mini golf. I found it super underwhelming. I used to live next to one, so it wasn't the big, amazing, surprise-worthy activity he'd been hyping for a week. So we start playing a round or two, and it's immediately clear he expected to win. He spent the entire time trash-talking me, chirping, and making comments. It became obvious he couldn't handle a competitive environment. What should have been a fun, casual date quickly turned into a him versus me situation. To be fair, even with the activity being a surprise, it started to feel like a power play. I put up with it for an hour or two, and ended up completely kicking his ass in score. He proceeded to throw a full-on tantrum, turning into a whiny man-child right in front of me. After the mini-golf meltdown, he drove me home. When I politely tried to end the evening, he insisted on walking me up to my apartment. Once inside, he tried to barge through my front door. I shut it in his face. That day taught me a few things. Online dating is not for me. Never let a man pick you up on a first date. You're stuck with him for the drive home, or worse, stranded somewhere. And absolutely never let a weirdo know where you live. Story 34. Met a guy off Tinder. He looked nothing like his pictures. While I was ordering at the coffee shop we had agreed upon, he suddenly changed his mind and insisted we go to Boston Market instead, on a Sunday morning. He cursed up a storm while we were there. I don't mind cursing, but there's a time and place, and 11 a.m. on a Sunday surrounded by families and churchgoers is definitely not it. He ordered half a rotisserie chicken, all white meat, and proceeded to eat the entire meal, including corn and mashed potatoes, with his hands, hardly breaking eye contact. During the date, he told me he used to have a sponsor because he had been addicted to crack. He randomly asked me if I thought $10,000 was a lot of money, gave no context, and then refused to share any when I asked. He also tried to put his hand on my thigh. When I finally decided to end the date, he texted me afterward complaining about how far he had driven to spend such little time with me. Story 35. I must have been in my early 20s. I met this girl online. She seemed really great and was super easy to talk to, though there was a weird smell about her hair and clothes. We went out to dinner and she insisted on paying. I was like, wow, yes please. As the night went on, we ended up heading back to her apartment. Before we went in, she casually mentioned she had a couple of pets. That didn't bother me. I had 2 dogs and a cat at home. But the moment she opened the door, a wave of stench hit me. Cat litter, rodents, dog hair everywhere. It was so bad I could barely breathe, and somehow I could even taste the smell in my mouth. Despite the horror, I stupidly went in, being, well, a horn dog. She invited me to her room. When she opened the door, it was worse. Rodent cages everywhere, even on the bed. I still have no idea how she managed to sleep there. The smell was unbearable. She tried to get me in bed, but I said something came up and left immediately. By my count, there were about 5 small dogs, 3 cats, some were hiding, and a dozen cages full of rodents scattered around the apartment. The place was a total mess, cat litter all over the floor. I could feel every little piece through my socks. The sight and the smell are still etched in my memory. Story 36. He talked obsessively about his diet and workout routine. At the time, I was also active at my local gym and followed a meal prep routine, so I could kind of appreciate it. At first, but he would not shut up about it. Even on our dinner date, he kept commenting on menu items and whether they would fit his macros. It went too far when he frowned at my order, some shrimp pasta at a highly rated local seafood place I was genuinely excited to try, and asked if it was my cheat day. I was so flabbergasted by the comment that I just laughed in shock and asked if he was serious. He smiled awkwardly as our food arrived. I was a few bites in when he said, "So, how did you start your fitness journey? Were you really overweight before? That would explain why you let yourself indulge once in a while." I almost choked on my food. I pulled out a $20 bill from my purse, laid it on the table, and told him to enjoy the rest of his evening, then walked out. He got up saying, "Wait, are you leaving? What happened?" and tried to chase me down, but had to wait for the check. He then bombarded me with texts, first begging to know what he had done, then rapidly turning into nasty, fatphobic, shaming messages. He accused me of being a crash dieter waiting to trap a man in a relationship so I could let myself go, or claimed I only got attention because I had discovered a treadmill. I blocked him and moved on. For the record, I was not overweight at the time. Story 37. I grew up with a girl I had drifted apart from, and after a long time, we finally managed to reconnect. Over the years, we had tried several times to meet up, but it never worked out. I told her she could pick anywhere she wanted. I just wanted to see her, catch up, and hear about everything I had missed. I picked her up, and we went to Starbucks for coffee. I had been hoping for something more like dinner, but it didn't really matter. I was just excited to see her again. We ordered our drinks and sat down, but the whole time she couldn't put her phone down. The conversation felt completely one-sided, me asking about her life and what she had been up to, while she scrolled through Instagram. She never asked about me or what my life had been like over the past 12 years. Mind you, this was my best friend growing up. We shared a childhood, and she couldn't have been less interested. The final straw came when, mid-sentence, she interrupted me to start live recording us for her story or whatever. I just got up and walked out, leaving her there. The most she talked to me that night was through angry texts calling me a pig and an a-hole for leaving her. I haven't spoken with her since, and that was 6 years ago. Story 38. Even though I know better, I met this guy who said we were going for sushi in Detroit at his apartment. I thought we were meeting at a restaurant, but then he called and said, "Meet me at my place and we can drive together." How was I so stupid? He had a crazy dad bod, missing teeth, smoked, had 2 cats, and lived in a super ramshackle apartment. Literally, used to be a warehouse. I cannot make this up. I got in his car, which he proudly announced he did all the work on myself, runs pretty good. He didn't mention he smoked, so the car smelled awful, and it had 600,000 miles on it. Detroit has multiple sushi places, but he drove me literally half an hour, almost to Flat Rock, which is completely not Detroit, at night. And I was already hesitant. We ended up at a gross sushi place that closed 20 minutes after we got there. He hadn't told me he has a 1-year-old daughter, and he spun this nice tale about how he hasn't found a church yet down here, even though he'd lived in Detroit for 10 years. If church isn't a priority, don't lie about it. You can't just suddenly invent a relationship with God because it's important to me. I literally felt so icky driving home from that date, and I will never again meet at a private location for a first date. He called me twice in the half hour it took me to get home, called me 4 times while I was sleeping, texted me twice, and then called me 8 times while I was at church the next morning. Just felt like a super skeezy situation. Story 39. My date got up to use the restroom, and a little later, the waitress came over to tell me my date was at the bar flirting with some guys for drinks. I got up, saw for myself, paid for my meal but not hers, tipped the waitress $100, and left. My date blew up my phone later, texting me about ditching her and not paying for her food, and even offered fun time in bed if I came back and picked her up and bought her meal. I just blocked her and went to sleep. On a different note, another girl told me straight up, "I'm not interested in dating anyone, but I'll do it with you if you pay for my meal." I told her, "You don't have to, but it's messed up that you didn't discuss this beforehand." She was actually pretty cool, and we're still friends. No, we've never slept together. Another time, a girl texted me on the day we were supposed to go out saying her ride from work left early and she was stuck. Trying to be a nice guy, I offered to give her a ride, and she accepted. I picked her up only to find out she lived almost an hour away from her job. When we got to her place, she introduced me to her mom and her 2-year-old son. I was surprised because she had never mentioned having a child. It's not a deal breaker, but it's definitely something I think should be mentioned up front, since it changes the dynamic of a potential relationship. Anyway, she starts getting ready in the bathroom, and her mom goes to her bedroom. I'm sitting there watching a kid's show on the TV while her son plays in front of it and the coffee table. Suddenly, I hear a swishing sound and look over to see him playing with a half-full bottle of Fabuloso. I panicked and said, No, I don't think you're supposed to play with that. I took it from him and put it on the bar, and he started crying. She comes in, asks what's going on, and I explained. She just says, "It's okay. That's his toy." While handing the Fabuloso back to her son, I told her, "That's not right. He could open it, drink it, and get hurt." She replied that he couldn't because she had the lid on really tight, then launched into a soapbox speech about how he's her son and I had no right to tell her how to raise him. I said, "Okay." She went back to getting ready, and when she left, I put the kid in his playpen and walked out with the bottle of Fabuloso without saying a word. She called me, furious, calling me a a-hole and threatening to call the police. I laughed and mockingly said, "Yeah, go ahead. Call the police and tell them I stole a half-empty bottle of floor cleaner that you give your own son to play with as a toy. Let's see how that works out for you." Then I hung up. I've had other experiences too. Apparently, I don't make the best choices, and for some reason, I could only get responses from women on POF. Story 40. A recent almost second date ended over how I cut onions. I went out with this woman about a week prior. Me, 49, her, 33. She worked as a cook or something at a local college. The first date went great, and we had planned a second one when time allowed. There were no red flags, and it was obvious there was some attraction. I live with my 18-year-old daughter and was making chili for the two of us. While on the phone with my potential second date, I mentioned I was making chili and explained that I was making 2 pots. My daughter liked finely chopped onions while I preferred chunkier pieces. Out of nowhere, I got a verbal assault about how I didn't know what I was doing, how I wasn't holding the knife correctly, and how I needed to use a food processor. This was even stranger because we weren't on video. There was no way she could see how I was holding the knife or anything else. First, big red flag. I ended the phone call a few minutes later. Several hours passed, and while I was sleeping, I got a voicemail. It was her calling to tell me how horrible I was for not following her how-tos and that I should know better. Damn. Second red flag. The next morning, I decided this was way too much weirdness over how I cut onions for a dinner she wasn't even part of. I called her, it went straight to voicemail, and I dumped her then and there. I posted about the date on social media, and a friend who lives about 100 miles away asked if the woman's name was XKEs. Turns out his friend had dated her too, and had experienced the same bizarre interactions over seemingly pointless things. Wow. I had dodged a bullet. This was in October, and it was so off-putting that I haven't dated since. I'm busy with my career, and I recently got a promotion, so I really don't have time to deal with this kind of nonsense. Story 41. This one guy messaged me on an online dating site before the apps existed and wanted to go for lunch. We arranged a date and started walking around the hospitality district. He scrutinized every menu we passed, saying things like no or expensive, and then we'd keep walking. After checking every menu on the street, he finally sighed and said, "I guess we're going to this place. It's the least unreasonable." It was weird. Once we sat down and started eating, I ordered another drink and the conversation was awful. When the waiter came by to ask how we were doing, he rolled his eyes and said, "We'll just take the checks." At this point, I was horrified, amused, disgusted, and bored all at the same time. I'm not being conceited to say I was well out of his league. He was almost 20 years my senior. He'd basically dragged me around town because he was cheap as hell and didn't want to spend money. I think he said he had a per diem from work for $70 and he was trying to stretch it for a date. I didn't think it was unreasonable to assume he'd pick up the check, considering he basically strong-armed me into this place. So, as soon as he said separate bills, I lit a cigarette. He recoiled in disgust and said, "Ew, you're a smoker? Absolutely disgusting. Really vile. Gross." Then he just shook his head, got up, and said he'd wait outside for me. This was the 2000s when you could still smoke on patios. I'm not defending smoking, just saying that by that point I was so turned off by this guy I didn't care if he thought smoking was gross because he was gross. I pay my bill, notice he left no tip, have to cover it, and then we start walking. The conversation in the street is condescending and banal. After a short while, I see my bus route at a stop and think, thank God, and just stop walking. He keeps going, turns around, and looks at me, so I say, "Oh, sorry, this is my bus. Nice to meet you." He looks genuinely confused, scratches his head for a moment and says, "I thought we'd go back to my hotel." I burst out laughing and say, "No thanks." He called me a bish and walked away. Story 42. We met at a pub for a drink. Thank God I hadn't agreed to dinner. He spent the whole time talking about what a great boyfriend he was and how super romantic he was. I asked him what the most romantic thing he had ever done was. He said he once ran a bath for his then-girlfriend and lit a candle. Other examples were basic, like cooking a meal. All he did was talk about himself, yet he was clingy and wanted to make it official after just one drink. For years, he messaged me about how great we could be together, even after I was dating someone else. On my wedding day, he messaged me saying he was disappointed I was marrying someone else, but it was phrased so nicely that it was clear he was just oblivious. After that, I heard from him one more time after I had my first child, and I think he finally realized I was really going to stick with my marriage. It became a bit of a joke between my husband and me. I should have blocked him, but I felt guilty because he was so clueless and clearly a little down. Story 43, I went on a date with a guy who wouldn't stop putting himself down. I asked about his hobbies, hating myself and the world. I asked what he does in his spare time. Doesn't matter, you'll think it's stupid. When I tried to talk about myself, he was completely unresponsive. After a while, I stopped talking and waited for him to say something. Nothing. We sat in silence for over an hour. Then, out of nowhere, he went on a rant for about 10 minutes about how women hate him, no one wants him, and he only asked me out because he thought I was as pathetic as he was. I got up, paid my portion of the meal, said nothing, and left. I never saw him again. I went on a date with a woman who was the most insufferable. I'm not like other girls. She literally wouldn't stop talking about how lame women who wear makeup are feminine or enjoy cooking and baking are, knowing that cooking is a huge passion of mine. I'd even brought a homemade blueberry pie for us to share. I finally snapped and asked, "If you hate women so much, why did you want to date them?" After that, she started kissing my back, saying, "You're not like those types of girls." I didn't stick around and took my homemade blueberry pie with me. Moral of the story: if all someone does is put themselves or others down, it's best to walk away. They don't need a partner. They need a therapist. Story 44. He took out his phone and very obviously secretly opened Tinder to show me that I wasn't just his only chat on there. I was his only match as well. He didn't say anything, but the way he turned the phone made it clear he wanted me to see. We went for lunch, and I told him the best milkshake was right down the street. He wanted to try it, so we went. Since we had already paid for lunch separately, I asked the waitress if I could pay with a card because I didn't have any cash. She said no. I told my date I wouldn't order anything, but he could. He asked what my favorite was and then ordered 2 of those milkshakes. I politely thanked him and said he really didn't have to pay for me. He didn't react at all. The waitress came back and put 1 milkshake in front of me and 1 in front of him. He grabbed mine, pulled it toward him, and drank it in almost 2 big gulps. And those milkshakes are huge. Then he went on to drink the second one as well. I couldn't say anything, just confused. I don't judge people for ordering more than 1 portion, but explicitly asking me for my favorite and then drinking it? Right after, he told me he was massively lactose intolerant. Story 45. First, it wasn't supposed to be a date. He was a work friend and knew I had a boyfriend. He asked me out for lunch, just as a friend, and we went to a pizza place. I thought we'd be splitting the bill, but he insisted on paying and made a point to tell me it was a personal rule of his not to tip servers. He went on a mini rant about how eating out is already overpriced, and if everyone refused to tip, employers would be forced to pay servers better wages. I guess it made a sort of sense, but his being an a-hole wasn't going to change our tipping culture. When I said, "Then I'll pay," and leave the tip, he got almost angry and refused to let me. I didn't have any cash on me, just my bank card, so I couldn't leave a few bucks on the table surreptitiously. I figured a few dollars wasn't enough to pick a fight over, so I let it go, but of course, it bothered me. I went back with him to his house because I'd left my car there. We had met there and driven together, and he invited me inside to show me something. The thing he wanted to show me was his vintage corn collection. Cool in some contexts, but it felt weird and creepy that he abruptly wanted to show me this. We hadn't even been talking about the subject. Next, he said he had something else he wanted me to see. It was in his bedroom. Along the top of his headboard was a row of at least 20 toys on display. He said he was a collector, but they weren't just for show. He sounded very proud of how scrupulously he cleaned them before and after using. Ew. Then he laid down on the bed saying he was tired. I said, "Okay then, get some rest," and got the hell out of there. He didn't really talk to me much at work after that. Thank God. Story 46. The guy was really awkward and nerdy, which is fine. Nerdy people are my type. But on the drive to the movies, he kept talking and telling jokes that weren't funny. When I tried to make a joke to lighten the conversation, he laughed hysterically loud, like barking, almost making me jump. It was definitely forced. At the movie, he talked the entire time, and not quietly. It was hard to enjoy the film, and I felt embarrassed because of all the annoyed people around us. Afterwards, we were starving and went to a restaurant. I ordered a margarita that was larger than I expected. I offered to pay, like I always do, but he stubbornly insisted on paying. And when I say stubborn, I mean stubborn. I'm stubborn too, and I didn't want to argue with him. I drank about half of my margarita but didn't want to get drunk on my first date. After he noticed, he repeatedly asked if I wanted to finish it. He was so pushy that I just wanted to stop drinking it altogether. When we got back to my truck, he invited me to his apartment 3 times, nearly begging. I felt so uncomfortable that I wondered if he was trying to get me drunk to sleep with me. There was no connection at all during the date. It felt like nothing he said was genuine, not even the bare minimum of vulnerability needed to get to know someone. He never asked me out again. I think he got the hint. But man, that was about 4 hours I'll never get back. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.